Cool. So several years ago, Ellen and I were on vacation in Denver, and we decided that we would visit the Natural Science Museum there because that's just the sort of thing, the nerdy kind of thing that we do when we're on vacation. So at the museum, we wandered into this room where people in lab coats offered to tell us what kind of foods we prefer based on the natural pH found in our saliva. So, of course, we said, yeah, sure. So they swabbed our tongues with litmus paper, and Ellen's paper turned a very pleasant shade of blue. Mine turned a kind of dull gray. And Ellen immediately noted with no small amount of satisfaction that her spit is prettier than mine. And the lab-coated scientists then proceeded to tell us accurately what kind of foods we prefer. For instance, Ellen really enjoys cilantro, but to me, cilantro tastes exactly like ivory soap, which raises the question of how I know what ivory soap tastes like. But that is a story for another time. The conclusion, apparently, was that Ellen has a refined sense of taste, and I do not, or perhaps that I was lacking in taste altogether. My memory's fuzzy on the results. But the point was clear. We all are created differently. Some preferences are just simply how we are wired. But not all partiality is natural. No one is born a racist. No one is born suspicious of immigrants. No one enters the world already convinced that God prefers people who look like them, who vote like them, or who worship like them. All of those assumptions are learned. And once they're learned, they can feel as natural and as unquestionable as taste itself. Which brings us to Peter. After the death of Jesus, Peter emerged as the central figure among the disciples. He was the one whom people looked to for leadership and continuity and clarity about how this strange and fragile new movement was becoming. What would their direction be? And to Peter and to everyone else around him, it seemed obvious who this movement was for. Jews. Jesus was Jewish. His disciples were Jewish. His scriptures were Jewish. His understanding of God was grounded in Israel's story, Israel's law, and Israel's covenant. So to understand what happens in Acts chapter 10, we need to slow down and really appreciate how essential Jewish social and religious boundaries were. Not as arbitrary rules, but as practices that had preserved a people for centuries. Dietary laws, purity codes, observing the Sabbath, circumcision, these were not just preferences, they were markers of identity. They were daily embodied reminders of who you were and to whom you belonged. For a small people repeatedly conquered and occupied, faithfulness, it wasn't abstract, it was survival. And Gentiles, especially Greeks and Romans, represented the opposite of that survival. They ate food forbidden by Jewish law. They worshiped many gods. They had different sexual norms, different family structures, different moral assumptions. They did not observe the Sabbath. They did not share Israel's story. So to associate too closely with Gentiles, it wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. It threatened contamination, ritual, cultural, and spiritual. So when the earliest followers of Jesus assumed that their movement was a Jewish one, they weren't being malicious. They were being faithful as they understood faithfulness. If Gentiles wanted in, well, there was a pathway. People occasionally converted to Judaism. So it held that if a Gentile wanted to be part of this Jesus movement, conversion to Judaism was a prerequisite. But conversion, that meant everything: identity, practice, and community. So convert first, and then we'll talk. Then, Peter has a dream. It's not a nice, gentle dream. In it, Peter sees a sheet lowered from heaven filled with animals, many of them ritually unclean from a Jewish standpoint, profane. A voice tells him to eat, but Peter refuses, not once but repeatedly. He knows who he is. He knows what obedience looks like. He knows the rules that have shaped his faith and his people, but the voice answers him with words that crack open Peter's whole worldview. What God has made clean, you must not call profane. So Peter wakes up shaken and confused and disturbed, and then almost immediately he's summoned to the home of a Gentile named Cornelius. And Cornelius is not just any old Gentile. He's a Roman centurion, an officer in the occupying army, a living symbol of domination, violence, and humiliation. Everything in Peter's formation tells him that this is wrong. This feels like compromise, like surrender, like erasing the boundaries that define who he is. And yet, in one of those quiet moments where history pivots, Peter goes anyway. And we learn something important here. Revelation alone does not change the world. It's our response to revelation. That's what makes all the difference. So, Peter crosses a boundary he never imagined crossing. And in doing so, he discovers something that unsettles him even more than the dream. Gentiles are people. People who pray. People who revere God. People who long for meaning, belonging, and purpose. Just like anyone. And Peter realizes, much to his surprise, that God's already arrived there before he did. Standing there in Cornelius' home, watching the Spirit move among people he was taught all of his life to avoid, Peter finally speaks the words that change everything. He says, I truly understand that God shows no partiality. This is not some sentimental realization. It's a theological earthquake. It means that faithfulness is no longer about guarding boundaries, but about recognizing where God is already at work. It means that obedience may require crossing lines rather than defending them. It means that the markers Peter once trusted to tell him who belonged and who did not can no longer be used that way. So this moment doesn't just expand Peter's heart, it reshapes the entire Christian movement. Without this story, Christianity remains a small Jewish renewal movement in a dusty corner of the Roman Empire. But because Peter crossed that threshold, the gospel crosses the world. And here's the part we can often rush past. Peter's awakening really didn't make the world safer. It did not simplify his faith. Also, he could not know the outcome of his choice to visit that house and the impact his declaration that a barrier he once believed was impassable had been brought down. He had just to trust that in declaring that that boundary was gone, he was standing on the side of God's loving intention for humankind, the big picture, and not merely in his own time, but in every age to come. In recent years and in recent days, we have seen other barriers arise, attitudes and actions that divide people, devalue people, and that attempt to shape who we are. This past Thursday, Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, wrote in the New York Times about the death of Renee Nicole Good, an American citizen of Minneapolis, a spouse and the mother of 3 children, who on Wednesday was shot and killed by an ICE agent. She was driving on a street in a neighborhood where ICE was conducting immigration raids. Many of us have seen video of that terrible incident. As we know, federal authorities, including the president and local and state leaders, including Mayor Frey and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and local law enforcement officials, they're offering starkly different accounts of what happened, differing explanations of motive, responsibility, and meaning. Jacob Frey believes Renee Good's death was avoidable, but tragically, Unsurprising, given the escalating friction between federal agents and local communities. As he put it, the administration's policies are about vilifying not just immigrants, but all who welcomed them and their contributions to our communities. Now, it's unlikely that the issue of undocumented immigration will be resolved anytime soon, but what's deeply troubling is witnessing a militarized approach that appears designed specifically to intimidate, to frighten, and to silence not only immigrants themselves, but anyone who would show up for them. As Mayor Frey writes, the message being sent is this: if you show up for your immigrant neighbors, or you're even simply present when those neighbors are taken, your rights will not be protected by law, and your life will be at risk. It is frustrating. It is heartbreaking. And if you share that dismay, not only about this incident, but about others like it, well, that deserves to be named. If you feel this goes beyond partisan politics, I want to give voice to that. If you are seeing government motivated by anger and fear and resentment and the urge to dominate rather than to serve, I hear you. My own deepest frustration, though, is a sense of impotence, of watching this erosion of norms we once assumed were stable and not knowing how best to respond. Now, I've usually counted myself among social and political moderates, pragmatists, who trust in civility and institutions and in the basic goodness of people. But I was reminded this week through an article by David Brooks of a book by the German theologian and pastor Reinhold Niebuhr. It's called The Children of Light and the Children of Darkness. Now, Niebuhr was a fierce opponent of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. In his view, the children of darkness are brutal but realistic about human nature, while the children of light are admirable but often naive about the depth of entrenched human selfishness. Niebuhr writes, the children of darkness, are evil because they know no law beyond the self. They are wise, though evil, because they understand the power of self-interest. The children of light are virtuous because they have some conception of a higher law than their own will. But they are usually foolish because they do not know the power of self-will. And David Brooks reflects that the children of darkness have advantages in their struggle against the children of light. They know what they want, and they don't have to worry about nuance. It's easier to destroy a social order than to build one. They capitalize on an elemental human reality that humans fear death and their own insignificance. So they compensate for their fears of insignificance by asserting their pride and by seeking power and control, if only vicariously through some strong man. Brooks goes on to say that while Niebuhr is rooting for the children of light, he wants them to be less naive about human nature. And Niebuhr himself puts it this way: the preservation of a democratic civilization requires the wisdom of the serpent and the harmlessness of the dove. So the children of light must be armed with the wisdom of the children of darkness, but remain free from their malice. As I thought this week about Peter, about his awakening to this truth that God welcomes all people without exception, I found myself wondering how that sounds today. Not in a Bible story from long ago, but here in 2026. Because what we are seeing, to me at least, looks like the opposite of inclusion. It's the opposite of welcoming. It's the opposite of honoring human beings as human beings. Instead, people are understood as threats to be feared or as tools to be used for political gain. So how are we to stand up to that level of darkness? Can we, as Niebuhr suggests, be less naive about human nature, wiser without losing our virtue, strong without becoming cruel, clear without becoming malicious? You know, Bible stories, I think, remain relevant, not because they're ancient words on a page, but because they continue to reflect our lives and our struggles and our relationship with the sacred. We can well imagine ourselves in Peter's place, confronted with a truth that dismantles so many long-held assumptions, forced to decide if we desire a faith that will make us safer or a faith that will make us braver. And like Peter, we're compelled to act on our fresh, sacred insight with a courage we didn't even know we possessed. So today, I invite us all to be awakened or reawakened to this truth. We are the children of light in this world, and the world needs us. We are the people called to tear down the walls that separate us from our neighbors, no matter where those neighbors come from. We are ordinary people who do possess extraordinary courage, and we will use our voices, our feet, and our resources to resist fear and intimidation and to stand for human dignity. In our time, this is how we remember and claim that God shows no partiality. And this is how we live like we believe it.